Throughout history, archaeologists have unearthed chilling evidence of humanity's darkest ends, from ritual sacrifices to gruesome executions and mysterious mass deaths. These discoveries, preserved in graves, bogs, and ruins, reveal not only how people died, but also the brutal and often ritualistic nature of human cruelty across the ages. In May 1950, two brothers, Viggo and Emil Højgaard, were digging for peat in the Bjælskovdal bog near Silkeborg, Denmark, when their shovels struck something unexpected, a face. At first, they thought they had uncovered the remains of a recently murdered man. The body was so well preserved that the local police were immediately called in. The skin was intact, the facial features were lifelike, and the man's peaceful expression made it seem as if he had simply fallen asleep. But once scientists examined him, they realized this was no modern crime scene. The body dated back more than 2,000 years, around 400 BCE, from the early Iron Age. This remarkable discovery would come to be known as the Tollund Man, one of the best preserved bog bodies in history. The peat bog had acted as a natural time capsule. Its acidic, oxygen-poor environment, combined with the presence of sphagnum moss, had tanned the Tollund Man's skin like leather, preserving even the fine stubble on his chin. His closed eyes and faint smile gave him a strangely serene appearance, as though he had died in peace. But the leather noose still around his neck told a different story, one that hinted at ritual, sacrifice, and perhaps murder. When archaeologists examined the body in detail, they found that he had been carefully placed in the bog. He was lying in a fetal position, his body positioned deliberately, with his eyes and mouth gently closed after death. This was not a careless dumping of a criminal's corpse. It was something far more intentional. Forensic experts and archaeologists joined forces to determine what had happened. The most immediate clue was the noose, still tied tightly around his neck. When X-rays and later CT scans were performed, they revealed that the man's neck had not been broken, meaning he had not died from a sudden drop, as in a typical hanging meant for execution. Instead, he had died slowly from asphyxiation, strangled by the pressure of the rope. This small but crucial detail changed everything. It suggested his death was controlled, deliberate, and ceremonial rather than punitive. His last meal, analyzed from the contents of his stomach, consisted of a simple porridge made from barley, flax, and wild seeds. Plain, modest, and possibly symbolic. From these findings, two main theories emerged. The first was that the Tollund Man was a criminal execution, someone punished by hanging for a serious offense. Hanging was known in Iron Age Europe as a method of punishment, and some saw the noose as clear proof. But the care taken after his death, the gentle arrangement of his body, his closed eyes, and the fact that he was buried alone in a sacred bog argued against this. There was no evidence of trauma, no broken bones, no wounds suggesting violence or resistance. He was not discarded like a criminal, he was honored. This led to the second and more widely accepted theory, ritual sacrifice. Many scholars believe the Tollund Man was offered to the gods, perhaps to the fertility goddess Nerthus or another deity, as part of a sacred ritual to ensure prosperity, good harvests, or protection. Iron Age people often viewed bogs as mystical gateways between the human and spiritual worlds, making them perfect places for offerings. Human sacrifices, though grim, were not uncommon in northern Europe at the time. Similar bodies, such as the Graubala Man and the Oud girl, were found in nearby bogs, showing signs of violent ritual deaths and careful burials. Today, the Tollund Man rests in the Silkeborg Museum, his face preserved in haunting detail. His calm expression still captivates visitors, silently holding on to secrets from a world long gone. Despite all the modern technology, CT scans, radiocarbon dating, forensic reconstructions, the true reason for his death remains unsolved. Was he a willing sacrifice, chosen for a sacred purpose, or a condemned man whose execution was softened by ritual reverence? No one knows for certain. What remains undeniable is that his death was not random. It was purposeful, significant, and deeply human, a story that has survived 2 millennia beneath the quiet peat of a Danish bog. It is hard to find a story that blends royal tragedy, mystery, and scientific detective work quite like the discovery of the Romanov family's remains. In July 1918, deep in the chaos of the Russian Revolution, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and the young heir Alexei, met a fate both brutal and secretive. Once rulers of the vast Russian Empire, they were reduced to prisoners in a modest home called the Ipatiev House in Yekaterinburg. Guards watched their every move. The family's royal clothes were replaced with plain garments, and the walls that once echoed with the chatter of court life were replaced with whispers of revolution and revenge. On the night of July 16, 1918, the family was told they were being moved for their safety. Instead, they were ushered into a dimly lit basement, supposedly for a group photograph. Within moments, Yakub Yurovsky, the man in charge, read a brief statement sentencing them to death on behalf of the Soviet leadership. Before they could process his words, a volley of gunfire filled the room. The execution was chaotic as bullets ricocheted off walls because the Grand Duchesses had sewn diamonds and jewels into their corsets, unknowingly turning their clothing into makeshift armor. The killers resorted to bayonets and close-range shots to finish what they started. The aftermath was gruesome. Blood soaked the floors, smoke from gunfire choked the air, and the cries of confusion faded into silence. But the real mystery began after the execution. The bodies were loaded into trucks under the cover of night and driven into the nearby Koptyaki forest, where the executioners tried desperately to erase their crime. They doused the corpses with sulfuric acid to destroy their faces, chopped some into pieces, and even burned parts of them before dumping them into a shallow grave. To mislead anyone who might stumble upon the site, they filled it with dirt and logs. Then they vanished into history, leaving only rumors behind. For decades, the Soviet government denied that the Romanovs had even been killed. Instead, fueled stories that the family had been moved or that some members had escaped. This secrecy gave rise to one of the most famous legends of the 20th century, the supposed survival of Princess Anastasia, the youngest daughter. Countless imposters later claimed to be her, keeping the myth alive for generations, while the truth slept beneath the Russian soil. Fast forward to 1979, when 2 local researchers, Alexander Havdonin and Geli Ryabov, stumbled upon a shallow grave near Yekaterinburg. Inside, they found charred bone fragments and skulls showing signs of blunt trauma and bullet holes, grim proof of execution-style killings. But it was the Soviet era, and speaking of such discoveries could lead to prison or worse. They quietly documented their findings and reburied the bones, keeping the secret until the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the site was finally excavated officially, and the truth that had been denied for 70 years came to light. Forensic experts confirmed through DNA testing that the remains belonged to Nicholas II, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters. The damage to the bones was horrific: multiple gunshot wounds, broken bones from bayonets, and traces of acid all spoke to the ruthless nature of their deaths. Yet, 2 family members were missing: the young Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters, Maria or Anastasia. This kept the mystery alive until 2007, when another small grave was discovered nearby, containing the remains of a boy and a girl. DNA analysis later confirmed they were the final missing Romanovs, finally closing the century-old case. After nearly 9 decades of speculation, the Romanovs were buried in St. Petersburg's Peter and Paul Cathedral with full royal honors. What began as a brutal midnight execution had turned into one of the greatest historical detective stories ever told, a tale of lost royalty, revolutionary vengeance, and the persistence of truth that no amount of acid or denial could destroy. The story of Jonestown isn't just another page in history. It is one of those dark, almost unbelievable chapters that make you pause and think, how could this even happen? It all began with Jim Jones, a charismatic yet increasingly paranoid preacher who led the People's Temple, a group that started with good intentions about equality, community, and racial harmony, but slowly spiraled into full-blown fanaticism. By the mid-1970s, Jones had moved his followers from the United States to a remote stretch of jungle in Guyana, South America, promising them a socialist utopia free from the evils of capitalism and racism. What they got instead was isolation, fear, and the slow unraveling of sanity under the oppressive heat of the jungle. The place was named Jonestown, and what was supposed to be a paradise soon became a living nightmare. Inside Jonestown, life was far from the idealistic community Jones had promised. Armed guards patrolled the compound, people were forced into grueling labor, and Jones' voice constantly blared through loudspeakers, delivering endless rants about loyalty and impending apocalypse. He controlled when people ate, slept, and even thought. Letters were censored, passports were confiscated, and any attempt to leave was treated as betrayal. For many, Jonestown became a trap disguised as salvation. Things reached a boiling point when U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit in November 1978, after receiving alarming reports from relatives of temple members who said their loved ones were being held against their will. At first, Ryan was welcomed with fake smiles and rehearsed enthusiasm, but cracks started to show when several residents slipped him notes begging for rescue. The next day, Ryan and his delegation prepared to leave with a small group of defectors, but Jones was not about to let anyone walk away. As Ryan's party waited to board planes at the Port Kaituma airstrip, armed members of the People's Temple rolled up in a tractor-trailer and opened fire. The attack was brutal and chaotic as bullets tore through the group, killing Ryan, 3 journalists, and 1 defector. Several others were wounded, but managed to flee into the jungle. Back in Jonestown, Jim Jones knew it was over. Convinced that U.S. forces would descend upon them, he gathered everyone in the pavilion and announced what he called a revolutionary suicide. Huge tubs of grape flavor aid, not Kool-Aid as popular legend says, were mixed with cyanide and sedatives. Some drank willingly, others were forced. Parents gave it to their children first. The cries that followed were described by survivors as something beyond human, a chorus of agony echoing through the jungle night. When Guyanese authorities arrived 2 days later, they found a scene that defied comprehension. The jungle was eerily silent except for the hum of insects. The smell hit them first, a thick chemical sweetness mixed with decay. As they entered the compound, they saw bodies sprawled across the ground, many lying arm in arm, as if in some haunting embrace. Over 900 people, including more than 300 children, were dead. Jim Jones himself was found slumped in his chair on the pavilion stage, a gun beside him and a bullet wound in his head. Cyanide cups and syringes were scattered everywhere. Some bodies had foam around their mouths, others clutched each other tightly, frozen in terror. The investigators were overwhelmed, not just by the scale of death, but by the eerie stillness of it all. The recovery operation was grim and grueling. The heat and humidity of the Guyanese jungle made the bodies decompose quickly, forcing rescuers to work in masks and gloves, spraying chemicals to contain the smell. U.S. troops had to be called in to help, and bodies were eventually flown out in military planes, stacked in rows like lifeless cargo. The world was stunned. Jonestown became a symbol of blind devotion gone horribly wrong. A cautionary tale about how one man's delusions could lead nearly 1,000 people to their deaths. Even decades later, the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" lingers in our vocabulary, a chilling reminder of how charisma can twist into control and faith can turn fatal when placed in the wrong hands. Andrei Chikatilo, infamously known as the Rostov Ripper, stands as one of the most horrifying figures in Soviet criminal history. Between 1978 and 1990, his brutal killing spree spread terror across the USSR, leaving behind a trail of mutilated bodies that would haunt investigators for decades. His victims, mostly women and children, were discovered in forests, fields, and train station outskirts, their bodies bearing marks of savagery that defied imagination. When authorities first began finding these corpses, the scenes were so grotesque that many refused to believe such crimes could occur in the Soviet Union, a state that prided itself on being free from Western-style deviance. Yet reality soon shattered that illusion. Victims were found with multiple stab wounds, often dozens, eyes gouged out, and parts of their flesh missing. It was not just murder, it was a ritual of cruelty. Chikatilo's acts revealed a darkness so profound that even hardened investigators were left shaken. The first known victim was a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Zakotnova in 1978, whose body was found in a river near Shakhty. Her mutilation set a grim precedent. For years after, bodies began appearing near railway lines and forest paths in the Rostov region. Some victims were stripped naked, their throats slit, and their limbs punctured in frenzied bursts of violence. Others were missing tongues, genitals, or internal organs, injuries that seemed less like random acts and more like a disturbing compulsion. The police, constrained by Soviet ideology that denied the existence of serial killers, initially blamed hooligans or drifters. But the evidence piling up told a different story. The brutality was consistent, methodical, and personal. Each discovery, each shallow grave or mutilated corpse pointed toward a single sadistic mind at work. The investigations became a nightmare of mistaken identities and wrongful arrests. At one point, several innocent men were executed for crimes they did not commit, all while Chikatilo continued killing with cold precision. The bodies kept turning up. Children found half buried in the snow, women's remains hidden in the woods, bones gnawed by wild animals. The scale of it all was staggering. By the late 1980s, forensic teams were discovering decomposed corpses so badly mutilated that identifying victims was nearly impossible. Each fiend carried the same haunting signature: stab wounds to the abdomen, missing body parts, and signs of post-mortem mutilation. Pathologists noted that many victims had been sexually assaulted or mutilated while still alive. The horror was not just in the killing but in the suffering that came before death. It was not until 1990 that Andrei Chikatilo was finally caught after years of relentless police work and psychological profiling. The moment of his arrest came after he was spotted acting suspiciously near a train station where previous victims had been found. When questioned, he denied everything. But forensic evidence and a chilling confession later revealed the full extent of his crimes. In interrogation, Chikatilo described the murders with unsettling calmness, recalling how he would lure victims with promises of food, money, or help, only to unleash a storm of violence upon them. His words painted vivid pictures of agony, the screams, the blood, the twisted pleasure he derived from domination. Investigators later revisited many of the discovery sites, unearthing remains that matched his confessions, confirming the scale of his atrocities. When the trial began in 1992, the courtroom turned into a spectacle of disbelief and horror. Photos of the victims and descriptions of the crime scenes were so disturbing that even hardened officers averted their eyes. The public, who once thought such evil was impossible in their society, now faced the chilling truth. In total, Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders, though only 52 were proven. He was executed by gunshot in 1994, ending a reign of terror that had lasted over a decade. Yet, even after his death, the images of those mutilated bodies, scattered across forests, buried near railways and left in snow-covered fields, remained a scar on Soviet history. Chikatilo's crimes were not just killings. They were calculated acts of dehumanization, reminders that true horror often hides behind the most ordinary faces. Deep in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico lies the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza, a gaping sinkhole once believed by the ancient Maya to be the very doorway to the underworld called Xibalba. To the modern eye, it looks like a tranquil pool, framed by limestone cliffs and jungle greenery. But beneath that greenish water lies a graveyard of grim devotion. During the height of the Maya civilization around the 9th century, this cenote became a stage for rituals that blended faith and horror, where humans were sacrificed to please the rain god Chak. Archaeologists, who later dredged its depths, uncovered a nightmarish collection of evidence, hundreds of human bones, disjointed and battered, lying among glittering treasures like jade ornaments, obsidian knives, gold discs, and pottery shards. The discoveries revealed that the cenote was not just a place of worship, but a watery altar where blood and fear met their end. When researchers first explored the sacred cenote in the early 1900s, they expected offerings of valuables, not the grim remains of men, women and children. As they hauled the sediment from the bottom, they found skulls bearing fractures and punctures, bones showing clear cut marks, and joints that appeared forcefully dismembered. Forensic analysis later confirmed that many victims had suffered violent trauma before death. Some were decapitated, others stabbed repeatedly, and a few were likely thrown in alive, their final moments spent struggling in the dark water. The mixture of genders and ages painted a horrifying picture of the Mayas' desperation to appease their gods. The bones of young boys and girls were particularly common, their innocence believed to make them more pleasing sacrifices. The brutality of their deaths left no doubt that these were deliberate and ritualistic killings carried out with unwavering purpose. The scene, if imagined at the time, would have been both mesmerizing and dreadful. Priests in elaborate feathered robes chanting prayers while the crowd watched in tense silence. The victim, often drugged or bound, would be led to the edge of the cenote, the surface glimmering below like a mirror to another world. Sometimes their chests were cut open to offer a beating heart to Chak before the body was hurled into the abyss. Other times they were tossed alive, their screams swallowed by the cavern's echo. The water below, believed to lead to the gods, became a liquid tomb of devotion and death. As years passed, layer upon layer of bones and relics accumulated, forming a macabre archaeological record of faith-driven violence. Modern dives into the cenote have uncovered remains showing blunt force trauma, broken ribs, and skulls smashed from behind, suggesting that some victims were clubbed before being offered. Others had neck vertebrae sliced cleanly, consistent with ritual beheadings. There were even indications of burn marks on certain bones, implying that fire played a role in some ceremonies, perhaps to purify the offering before its descent into the sacred waters. These discoveries transformed the cenote from myth to historical reality, showing that the Mayas' devotion to their gods was not just symbolic but written in blood and bone. For centuries, the cenote's waters kept their secret well, but once disturbed, they revealed the dark beauty of a civilization that saw life and death as part of the same sacred cycle. To the Maya, these acts were not mere brutality. They were divine exchanges, human pain for heavenly rain. Yet, for modern observers, the image remains haunting. Hundreds of bodies lying silent at the bottom of a natural well, their bones whispering of terror, sacrifice, and belief. The sacred cenote of Chichen Itza today stands calm, its surface reflecting the sky. But beneath lies the chilling truth that this peaceful pool was once a blood-soaked gateway to the gods, where countless lives ended in brutal devotion.